So Biden and Harris continue to tout themselves as the number one supporters of HBCUs with a new announcement that support is about to cross $17 billion. But what does that really mean?
I mix what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like.
White House announcement, Biden-Harris administration announces $1.3 billion in additional funding and a record of over $17 billion in support for historically Black colleges and universities. But in response to what this announcement says is historic underfunding of HBCUs and a recommitment to support those institutions, what it says ultimately here as a component of this outsized economic impact, that is the outsized economic impact that HBCUs are said to have positively on Black people, something we'll come back to in a moment. HBCUs play a significant role in the research and development R&D that drives vital progress in science, technology, engineering, and math, STEM. As such, the Biden-Harris administration has made it a priority to expand the capacity of HBCUs to offer high-quality STEM education programs and to compete for federal R&D dollars. In August 2022, President Biden signed the CHIPS and Science Act, which requires federal research agencies to provide funding and other support for expanding the R&D capacity of HBCUs. The Biden-Harris administration has worked diligently to implement this law. As we continue to look through this, again, my repeated concerns about this approach, which focus actually, as we'll see here, exclusively on STEM and research and development sponsored by the federal government in those related fields, does nothing to help Black young college students, future leaders of society, engage humanities, social sciences, critical thinking. And as we've talked about repeatedly, this just continues to perform the function of limiting the radical potential of Black people, starting with, in this case, Black youth attending HBCUs. So what do we see in the rest of this announcement? R&D, $188 million, $1.1 million to support students directly through need-based grants, federal programs, including Pell Grants. In other words, the smallest portion is going to helping funding and the cost of the universities, which is just federal support or subsidies for the universities themselves. It may read as an assistance to students, but it's another subsidy for the universities themselves. We're getting Department of Defense, U.S. Air Force money, $90 million over 5 years to select HBCUs, including Maryland's own Bowie State and Howard University, of course. The Department of Commerce, National Telecommunications and Information Administration. The Department of Commerce, CHIPS for America. Department of Commerce, National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. Department of Agriculture. Department of Energy. And even when we get to the Department of Education, it's $25 million for research and development infrastructure to transform the research infrastructure, including strengthening research productivity, faculty expertise, physical infrastructure, and partnerships leading to increases in external funding, all of which is for STEM-related fields, at least an overwhelming majority of it. Because as we're going to see here, there's nothing listed here for the humanities. The Department of Education announced $2.3 million in new grant awards for the Minority Science and Engineering Improvement Program, Department of Transportation, Aeronautics and Space, Space Lab, another HBCU Space Lab reference, Department of Health and Human Services, health-related fields, National Science Foundation, more National Science Foundation and Technology Council Committee on STEM, co-STEM. And then it starts to look like, something around affordable housing. $5.5 million to conduct housing and community development to support and production of affordable housing, support home ownership, advance the use of renewable energy, and address infrastructure inequality affecting underserved communities. That's a lot for $5.5 million. And when I read in here, more infrastructure, home ownership, that's still very little about actually closing material gaps and divides and making meaningful improvement for the community. And then, of course, we round it off with DOJ, Department of Justice, grants and awards, and an increase from $900,000 up to $5.2 million. So not much there dedicated to the intellectual development and expansion of critical thinking capabilities, reducing the threat, certainly reducing the threat to any potentially radical. So this is not, again, a condemnation of STEM-related fields. It's to point out, as we have been, that STEM is chosen as a less threatening avenue through which to fund the intellectual development of any kind of Black youth, where it's understood or believed at least to be less threatening in terms of leading people to all the forms of thought and ideas that might redirect how they use or the consciousness applied to that science, technology, engineering, and math. Now, there was one other aspect of this White House announcement that I wanted to address, which is here in the middle of this announcement, you in reading about all the good HBCUs do in producing Black judges, Black doctors, and dentists, there is reference to new research by the United Negro College Fund, which says that compared to Ivy League and other top ranked non HBCU institutions, HBCUs help more than 5 times as many students move from the bottom 40% to the top 60% of US households. And in fact,
sometimes I get this ridiculous question.
Are you sitting down? Are you ready?
People ask me, are HBCUs still important? Do we still need HBCUs?
Look, the same reason why we need HBCUs today is the same reason why HBCUs were created in the first place.
We are UNCF. For 8 decades.
But wait. So I know the United Negro College Fund wants to justify its existence and support this kind of federal support for HBCUs. But are they going to come back and actually answer or explain what it is, why were HBCUs founded in the first place? I don't know what they're suggesting here, but of course they were created specifically to help usher in an acceptable form of so-called Negro citizen, the Black bourgeoisie, not to emancipate, close material divides, or revolutionize society. Just so we're clear on that. Okay.
Decades, we have served as the nation's leading advocate for the importance of historically Black colleges and universities.
And we brought the receipts. Read our new report and you'll see how HBCUs are economic engines powering communities across America.
HBCUs generate $16.5 billion in economic impact.
So again, we're going to look at the report, but this is slick. Economic impact on communities. What exactly does that mean? This is again, they're alluding to, but I don't know that they're actually addressing these important points that are being raised here.
On communities all across this country. Like a big company, HBCUs circulate money in our national and local economies. If HBCUs were
circulating
company,
dollars,
they would place among the top 50 of the Fortune 500 companies.
So this is like a microcosm of the buying power thing. So we circulate dollars, and then if like I said about the Black community, if its buying power were compared to the GDP of so-called free and independent nations, Black America would be what, in the top 20, top 16. But just like we always have to remind, GDP is gross domestic product. It is not a measurement of wealth or income and does not measure inequality within a society. We're seeing something similar happening here. If HBCUs were a single company, they would be among the top 50 of the Fortune 500 companies. But what does that mean? Just as we have to ask, what does it mean to be, if that were true, which it is not, ranked among the top 15, 20 countries where Black America's buying power compared to the GDP of those countries. Buying power is not GDP. And as I said, GDP does not do all the things that people think it does. What does it mean to then be a so-called independent country in the context of this global economic order? Are these countries free? Is Mexico free as a nation relative to the United States or the West? And if HBCUs were a top 50 Fortune 500 company, what value would that actually mean for Black people? What does it mean to have a company in the top 500, the Fortune 500? It means they're making a lot of money. It means they're exploiting a lot of labor, land, and resources. It does not mean they are redistributing goods, services, and wealth back to anyone. In fact, quite the opposite. You don't make it on that list without all that exploitation. So again, these comparisons are just disturbing.
HBCUs create over 136,000 jobs in 1 year.
An HBCU graduate will earn 57% more in their lifetime than they would without a degree.
HBCUs educate the majority of Black professionals in this country. Take Tuskegee University. It's the #1 educator of African American aerospace science engineers and veterinarians in the nation.
They're economic engines, generating wealth all over the United States.
All over.
That is the HBCU effect.
All right. So I will, you get the gist. I'll put the link. All of these, everything used here will be linked in the show description. So if anyone thinks that I've misrepresented anything or misinterpreted anything, just put it in the comments and let me know. But you see the gist of where that video is going. HBCUs should be supported and invested in because, much like is the claim of Black business, they redistribute and recirculate money and wealth back into societies and communities. Okay, but let's not stop there. Let's take a look at the report itself. HBCUs Transforming Generations, Social Mobility Outcomes for HBCU Alumni. United Negro College Fund. A mind is a terrible thing to waste. Some of us remember growing up on those commercials and it became almost a pre-meme type joke. So again, I'll link to this so you can download and read this at your leisure. And again, check me on my reading of it. But the short of it is they found a way to measure this, what they call mobility rate, to assess the social mobility of Black students matriculating Black colleges and universities. I did look into their method, and to the extent that I could understand what they've done, they found a way to look at the household incomes of Black people going into HBCUs and then assessing using a 5-year window of their earnings after they've left those HBCUs, after they've graduated. And as they say here, the data is based on students born in 1980, 82, 83, 84. And most of the data was captured during the time students were between 19 and 22 years old, obviously average age of college. And then student income was measured as students' individual labor earnings as of 2014, which was when students being targeted would be in their early to mid 30s. Cohort members' income was also compared to others, their age, and then organized into quintiles. And they used, as it says here, the baseline cross-sectional estimates of child and parent income distributions by college data set. So they assessed, there were 50 HBCUs in the study within the 1,285 schools assessed, which represented over half of the 90 currently operating 4-year HBCUs in the country. Then they developed the mobility rate, which is equal to the access rate times the success rate. The access rate was the percentage of low-income students going into a certain institution. The success rate is a measurement of those students' earnings above or ability to move out of the income condition of their household after college, and then that totaled or was multiplied, and that's how they found the mobility rate. So as you see here, even though HBCUs only comprise 3% of all 4-year nonprofit colleges and universities, 4 of the top 10 universities with the highest access rates in the nations are HBCUs, meaning HBCUs well above the percentage of nationwide universities and certainly Ivy League universities have higher numbers of students coming in from lower income households. I highlighted Philander Smith College here is in the top 10 of access rates because, as we'll be talking to the author of the former president of Philander Smith College in a new book, raising some beautiful contradictions and critiques of the HBCU. Stay tuned. We'll be Black, not historically Black. We'll be back to talk about that book as soon as possible. Now, after all that, what they conclude here, the point is to conclude the value of the HBCU. The mobility rate is defined as the fraction of a college's students who come from the bottom 40% and transition into the top 60%. So to demonstrate how HBCUs are fueling the middle class, they want to show that, as they show here in Table 7, HBCUs more than anyone else move Black people upwards. So as they point out here, it's worth noting that HBCUs support nearly 5 times more students than Ivy League than Ivy Plus ranked institutions in facilitating students' movements from the bottom 40% in household income to the top 60%. Now, of course, this has a lot to do with, as we already showed, that Ivy Pluses have very few that would need that level of mobility in the first place, because they don't accept that many Black people, period. They're not accepting that many Black people who are poor, even more, period. So then there you have the ability for this report to make this conclusion about the mobility rates of HBCUs. So ultimately, these findings demonstrate that investment in HBCUs means sowing into institutions that are primary drivers of success, historically marginalized people. Now, there were a couple other key features of this report and that video that we watched a portion of that I just wanted to quickly mention here. One, the report only measures total incomes earned, showing 50+% increase in earnings by HBCU grads, but nothing of divides or gaps. So it's just saying that, again, relatively speaking, HBCUs graduate more and improve the incomes more of poor Black people than any other institution or any other, like, similarly situated university or college. Okay. They also point out that no HBCU has even a $1 billion endowment, and all HBCUs total, that is all 100 plus HBCUs total, if you pooled all of their endowments, only crosses $5 billion. Harvard and Yale and Princeton are thinking the 30, 40, and $50 billion range of endowments just by themselves. So even as they're talking about the value in these institutions being in propelling Black people forward, they're not showing that relative to the condition of the rest of the population. And when they talk about the wealth spreading and circulating that occurs because of HBCUs, they're not talking about where that ends up. Because again, all the data would show that it ends up in a situation where Black wealth is headed to zero, where Black income is 15 cents on the white dollar, and on and on and on and on we go. So this is certainly no endorsement for Trump. This is again, I'm voting for Claudia and Karina of the Party for Socialism and Liberation. But if you are going to vote for Kamala Harris, at least understand a little bit more about these claims, particularly when they want to wave this flag of supporting HBCUs around. It's all going to STEM. It's all going back to the federal government through military defense contracts and cybersecurity contracts. And the wealth that's being generated all goes back to the society in its same current organized arrangement as far vis-a-vis who owns what and who gets what. So that same 737 people that Forbes reported a month or so ago that are worth now $5.5 trillion, that's where it ends up. So we need a lot more, again, focusing on the outcomes and not just these fantasies of opportunity. Peace if you're willing to fight for it, like Fred Hampton used to say. Catch you next time right here at
I mix what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like.